TSA agent ripped her $4,000 dress just to be funny. He didn't know her husband owned the airport. You ever have one of those days where everything seems perfectly aligned, right before it all crashes sideways? Danielle Kingsley did. It was a warm Thursday afternoon in late September, and the kind of sun that hits Phoenix had that hazy, golden tint. Not too hot, not quite cool, just right. Danielle stood outside Terminal 3 of Sky Harbor International Airport, her suitcase by her side, her driver long gone, and a ticket to the most important gala of her career waiting in her purse. She adjusted her sunglasses, smoothed the front of her deep emerald green gown, custom-made, hand-stitched silk, and walked toward the entrance with a grace that didn't ask for attention, but got it anyway. Danielle wasn't just any woman in a pretty dress. She was 38 years old, sharp as a tack, and one of the most in-demand event planners in the Southwest. Corporations flew her out for six-figure celebrations. Politicians begged her to plan their fundraisers. Her reputation rested on precision, and tonight's black tie gala in Santa Barbara was the kind of opportunity you don't miss. Especially not when the keynote speaker was a tech billionaire and half the guest list included people who could change your entire career with a handshake. But beneath the poise, Danielle was tired. 3 weeks of back-to-back events, a toddler with night terrors. Her husband Julian, supportive as always, was back home juggling conference calls and a sick Labrador. She just needed this flight to go smoothly. Of course it didn't. She rolled her sleek carry-on up to the security checkpoint, heels clicking, mind already rehearsing her notes for the toast she was scheduled to give. The TSA line was surprisingly short. She handed over her ID, smiled politely, and stepped through the scanner without a hitch. Or so she thought. "Ma'am," came a voice. Young, cocky, too loud. She turned. A TSA agent in his mid-20s, badge reading K. Fuller, stepped toward her with a smirk, like he was about to win a bet. "We've got a random secondary screening," he said. Danielle blinked. "I already cleared the scanner." "Still random," he replied. "Just protocol." She looked past him to the supervisor, a woman in her 50s, who didn't even glance their way. The other lines were moving, passengers flowing through uninterrupted. She knew what this was. She'd felt it before. You could have all the polish and poise in the world and still be singled out. But Danielle didn't argue. That wasn't her style. She nodded once and followed Fuller to the side. "Arms out," he instructed. She complied. He began the pat-down, overly thorough. Hands lingered too long on her shoulders, pressed too hard along the seams. His tone had shifted, something performative now, like he wanted people to notice. "You sure this is a real dress?" he said, tugging lightly on the strap. "It's custom," she replied calmly. "Please don't pull on it." "Just checking for wires," he shrugged, yanking harder. And that's when it happened. A loud rip. Gasps from the line behind her. Danielle stood frozen, her left side completely exposed as the gown tore from armpit to hip. One hand instinctively clutched the fabric, the other still half raised in compliance. The world around her didn't move. People stared. Some whispered. No one intervened. K. Fuller looked down at what he'd done. For half a second, there was a flicker of panic on his face. Then it disappeared behind a smug shrug. "My bad," he said. "You can get dressed and come back through." Danielle didn't answer. She couldn't. Her jaw was locked. Her fingers trembled. She turned, walked away from the line without saying a word, found a corner by the wall, and pulled out her phone. But this wasn't just about a ruined dress. It was about being stripped, literally and metaphorically, of your dignity in front of strangers who refused to blink. Danielle sat alone in the corner of the terminal, dress pinned awkwardly beneath her coat, knees drawn together, one heel slipped halfway off. Her suitcase sat untouched by her side, and her phone rested on her lap like it weighed 10 pounds. She hadn't cried. Not yet. But her throat had gone dry, and her mind was racing. Embarrassment clung to her like humidity. She could still feel the stares, the silence in the air when the gown tore, the way the TSA agent's smirk stayed on his face even after he ruined it. She hadn't expected an apology. She wasn't naive, but she hadn't expected cruelty either. And that's what it felt like. Cruel. Danielle exhaled slowly and finally tapped a name on her screen. It rang twice before a familiar voice answered. Calm, steady, her anchor. "Hey babe," said Julian. "You boarding soon?" Her silence lasted too long. "Danny?" She cleared her throat. I need you to listen to me and not get mad. Immediately, his tone shifted. What happened? She explained it slowly, every detail. The way she was pulled aside, the unnecessary pressure of his hands, the exact moment the seam gave out, and the way people just watched. Julian didn't interrupt, not once. He let her speak until her voice broke, and then he asked just one question. What was his name? Fuller. K. Fullers, she whispered. He was so proud of himself. There was a long silence on the other end. She could hear him breathing. He was pacing. She could picture it. Hand on his chin, eyes focused, brain calculating. Then he said the thing that made her sit up straighter. You know that holding company I told you about last year? The one we bought majority in for regional infrastructure projects? Yeah. It owns Sky Harbor. She blinked. What? Julian's voice was calm but clipped now. I didn't say anything before because it wasn't relevant, but now it is. Danielle didn't speak. She wasn't sure what to feel. Relief? Anger? She just stared at the sea of people moving past her like she was invisible. You okay? He asked gently. I will be. Julian exhaled again. Sit tight. Don't leave. I'll make some calls. Julian, I'm not making a scene, he said, but I'm not letting this slide either. What Danielle didn't know was that within 10 minutes of that call, 3 different people in 3 different departments were already pulling surveillance footage. Meanwhile, back in security, Officer K. Fuller leaned against a wall near the break room, snickering with another agent. Did you see her face? He chuckled. Like I'd ever touch a dress that expensive on purpose. She should be thanking me. Probably fake anyway. His colleague, older and clearly uncomfortable, looked around and muttered, You know they have cameras, right? Fuller rolled his eyes. Please. They delete half of it in 24 hours. Nobody cares. He was wrong. A woman in a crisp black suit with a Homeland Security badge appeared at the end of the hallway moments later. Agent Fuller, she said coolly, you need to come with me. His smile faded. Is this about the screening earlier? He asked, already straightening up. Now. He followed her down the hall, and it didn't take long before he realized this wasn't some slap on the wrist. A meeting room had already been cleared. A regional TSA supervisor was waiting inside. A legal advisor joined via video call, and behind them, paused on the screen, was a wide-angle shot from the overhead security cam, clear as day, of Fuller's hands yanking Danielle's dress, followed by the exact moment it tore. No audio was needed. The image told enough. This is a formal misconduct review, the supervisor said plainly. You'll be placed on immediate leave pending the outcome. You are not to interact with any passenger or staff member until further notice. Fuller tried to speak, but the words got tangled in his throat. Back in the terminal, Danielle sat still, unaware that a quiet storm had already begun in her name. But the wound wasn't in the dress. It was in the way no one had stepped forward when it happened. Danielle eventually moved to an empty gate down the hall, somewhere quiet where no one would recognize her or pretend not to. She wrapped her coat tighter around her, knees crossed, phone resting on her thigh. She wasn't angry anymore, not visibly, but something inside her had shifted. This wasn't about ego or even revenge. It was about that moment when people decide your dignity is optional, disposable, and she wasn't about to sit back and let that slide. The airport supervisor approached her 20 minutes later, polite, nervous, his voice measured, practiced. Mrs. Kingsley, I'd like to apologize on behalf of the airport authority and TSA for what you experienced earlier. We are conducting an immediate investigation. Danielle raised an eyebrow. That was fast. He shifted in place. There was a call from one of our investment group's partners, Mr. Julian Kingsley. She gave a small nod. That's my husband. The supervisor swallowed. He's highly respected, he said carefully. We were unaware of your relation, but please know this incident is being taken seriously regardless of affiliation. Danielle let the silence hang for a beat before responding. I'm not asking for a favor, she said. I want accountability. For me, and for the women who don't have someone like Julian to make a phone call. The supervisor nodded, finally meeting her gaze. We understand. He handed her a sleek black folder. Here's the preliminary incident report. You have every right to pursue this further. Legal, media, whatever you decide. We've already pulled the footage. Will cooperate fully. Danielle accepted the folder. The weight of it didn't feel like power. It felt like burden. She didn't want to sue. She didn't want headlines. What she wanted was for that man, Fuller, to look her in the eye and realize she wasn't just some woman in a dress. She was a person with a name, a family, a life. Her flight rebooked for later that evening. She finally boarded wearing an airport gift shop sweater and a pair of yoga pants she kept in her carry-on just in case. She hadn't planned to need them, but that was the thing about life. It didn't ask permission before it changed your whole day. When she landed in Santa Barbara, a car was waiting. The gala had already started, and Danielle knew she wouldn't have time to change into anything glamorous. She didn't care. She showed up late, understated, hair still perfect, but clothes casual. The room full of tuxedos and gowns turned when she walked in. Her assistant Mira rushed over. "Danielle, oh my God, are you okay?" Danielle smiled gently and squeezed her hand. "I'm fine. Let's find my seat." That night, she delivered her toast. No fancy gown, no glitter, no forced poise. Just her voice. Clear, strong, present. "I had planned to talk about connection tonight," she told the room, glass raised. "But I've realized connection means nothing without respect. Whether in business, friendship, or 5 minutes at an airport checkpoint, how we treat each other in moments of power matters." No one interrupted. Even the servers paused mid-pour. "So tonight," she continued, "I toast to dignity, to the kind that doesn't come with titles or dollars, but with basic human decency. We all deserve that." She clinked her glass quietly and sat down to a standing ovation she hadn't expected, but deeply needed. But as powerful as that moment was, something inside her still wanted closure. And closure, in this case, meant confrontation. 3 days later, Danielle walked into the administrative wing of Sky Harbor Airport, not as a passenger, but as someone with business to settle. She didn't wear makeup, no jewelry, just a plain black blazer, slacks, and sneakers. Her hair pulled back in a low bun. She looked like she meant business, because she did. A legal rep from the holding group walked beside her, not saying much. He didn't need to. Danielle already knew the layout, the protocol, the leverage. Julian had made sure she had full access to the meeting. At the end of the hall sat a small conference room. Inside, 2 TSA supervisors, an airport HR rep, a union rep, and Officer K. Fuller. He didn't recognize her right away, not dressed like this, not without the gown. But when she sat down across from him, eyes locked, chin lifted, he stiffened. The room fell quiet. The HR rep cleared her throat. "We're here for a mediated discussion regarding the incident on Thursday involving Mrs. Danielle Kingsley and Officer Kyle Fuller. This is a closed-door meeting and will not be recorded." Danielle leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table. "I don't want to hear excuses," she said, voice steady. "I came here so he could hear me, so he could understand." Fuller shifted in his chair. The smirk was gone now. No one was laughing. "You saw a black woman in a gown and decided to make her your target," she continued. "You didn't follow protocol. You didn't handle me with respect. You humiliated me in front of strangers and destroyed something valuable. Not just the dress, but something you clearly don't understand." Fuller opened his mouth, closed it again. "I've had rough days too," Danielle said, "but I've never once used them as an excuse to strip someone of their dignity." Fuller finally spoke, voice low and defensive. "I didn't mean to rip it. It was just part of the check. I didn't think—" "No, you didn't," she interrupted. "You didn't think. You didn't care. And you thought no one would hold you accountable." The supervisors stayed silent. They had already watched the footage. They had already seen the expression on his face when the dress tore. This wasn't about proving what happened. It was about what came next. Danielle turned to the HR rep. "I don't want hush money," she said. "I don't want a PR apology. I want a record of this man's behavior attached to his file, so the next woman he treats like this doesn't have to sit in a terminal trying to decide whether to cry or scream." The HR rep nodded. "And I want a training protocol put in place for situations like this immediately, including gender sensitivity, physical boundaries, and escalation procedures." The supervisors exchanged glances. "That's doable," one of them said. Fuller looked up, face reddening. "You trying to ruin my career?" he asked, bitterness creeping into his tone. Danielle didn't blink. "You did that part yourself." No one came to his defense. The meeting ended shortly after. Fuller was placed on unpaid leave pending a formal internal review. Danielle didn't stick around to celebrate. She walked out of that room the same way she came in, quiet, purposeful, calm. Outside, Julian waited near the car, leaned against the passenger door, arms crossed. He didn't speak until she was close. How'd it go? Danielle slipped on her sunglasses. Productive. He opened the door for her. You want lunch? She smiled faintly. Only if it comes with fries and 0 questions. They pulled off the property, the airport growing smaller in the rearview mirror. The road ahead was wide open. Later that week, Danielle received a letter in the mail. It was typed. No signature, just a line at the bottom that read, "From someone who was there." The note was short. I didn't say anything at the time. I should have. I watched what he did to you and I just stood there. I'm sorry. It wasn't right. Danielle folded the letter and put it in her desk drawer. Not because it fixed anything, but because it meant someone else saw her. And maybe, just maybe, they'd do better next time. But even with action taken, the question lingered in her mind. What if she hadn't had connections? What if it was someone else? Someone who wouldn't have been believed? That thought stayed with her, quietly fueling what she would do next. Danielle didn't talk about the incident publicly. She didn't post it on social media. She didn't call a reporter or make a viral thread. But that didn't mean she moved on quietly. The next month, she partnered with a civil rights attorney she trusted and a small group of advocates focused on traveler protection laws. Not high profile, not flashy, just real people doing real work, pushing for policy changes that actually made sense. Stuff like mandatory body cams for TSA during random screenings, transparency reports for complaints, and third-party oversight boards at major airports. It wasn't glamorous, but it was necessary. Her name helped open doors. Julian's resources helped keep them open. But what really pushed the momentum was her story, and the quiet stories of hundreds of others who wrote in with their own experiences. Strangers who had been touched without consent, humiliated, talked down to, ignored. Danielle had become their mirror, and that responsibility was bigger than one torn dress. Still, some nights, when the house was finally quiet and her son was asleep, she'd replay the moment over in her head. The rip, the silence, the burning in her chest. Not because she hadn't healed, but because part of healing meant remembering exactly why she stood up in the first place. One evening, while setting up for a corporate gala in San Diego, a young woman approached her near the dessert table. She was barely in her 20s, wearing a staff lanyard and holding a clipboard tight to her chest. Nervous. "Excuse me, are you Danielle Kingsley?" Danielle turned. "Depends who's asking," she said with a soft smile. The woman laughed, a little shaky. "Sorry, my name's Amira. I'm interning with the vendor team. I just wanted to say thank you." "For what?" "I saw your name on the planning sheet and thought it might be you. My cousin told me about what happened at the airport. She said, the way you handled it gave her hope." Danielle's smile faded into something softer, more real. "She's in school now," Amira added, "studying law. Said she wanted to be the kind of person who made sure women like you never had to explain themselves." Danielle didn't know what to say at first, so she just nodded. "Tell her to keep going," she finally replied. "We need people like her." That moment stuck with her, not because it was emotional, but because it reminded her that impact isn't always loud. Sometimes it's one person who saw what you did and decided to do better because of it. And for Danielle, that was enough. A few weeks later, the TSA quietly announced a revised screening policy for secondary inspections. New sensitivity guidelines, a training rollout, and a new reporting system that didn't filter out complaints unless they passed arbitrary thresholds. They never mentioned Danielle by name. They didn't have to. She had already made her mark. The dress that got torn, she never tried to replace it. It hung in a garment bag in the back of her closet, ripped, folded neatly, untouched. She kept it not as a reminder of pain, but of power. Of that exact second, she decided silence wasn't an option. Of the moment, she chose to reclaim her voice. Because sometimes, the most important thing you wear isn't what's on your body. It's your boundaries, your story, your strength. And that's something no one can rip away from you. If you've ever been humiliated, dismissed, or treated like your voice didn't matter, this story is your reminder. You're not crazy, you're not dramatic, and you're not alone. Speak up, even if your voice shakes. And when you see someone else being treated unfairly, don't just watch. Say something, because silence doesn't protect the victim. It protects the problem. If this story moved you, take a moment to share it with someone who needs to hear it. You never know who might find their strength in your voice. And if you've ever been through something like this, feel free to share your story below. Let's remind the world that respect isn't optional. It's a right.